It has been, needless to say, another tumultuous week in the news. You know, when a president articles of impeachment were passed, and we want to take a closer look now at that and some other top stories with our roundtable.
National, local, as always, we have a great roundtable. So some introductions first. Pam Keith is a labor lawyer and U.S. Navy veteran. Last year, she ran for Congress as a Democrat in the 18th Congressional District. Rosemary O'Hara is the editorial page editor of the Sentinel. Marili Cancio is an attorney in Miami and an influential voice in Republican Party politics on many levels. Ladies, welcome. Powerful roundtable today.
Yes,
Great to be here.
Yes, it is. Rosemary, let me begin by asking, I don't want all of you to weigh in on this, but like all of you, I spent hours listening, watching to the Judiciary Committee this week and these endless, interminable arguments, one day for 14, 15 hours. And I came away, number one, depressed by what I had heard. I don't think it changed anybody's mind, certainly not on that committee. But what really bothered me was that it just underscored in the worst possible way the deep divisions, not only in Congress, but in this country. And how are we going to heal this stuff? I mean, what was your take from that?
I wish I knew the answer to the healing part, but you're absolutely right about how divided we are. People on that committee knew how they were going to, I think, vote before they even, and we've all made up our mind about the evidence. I think that they were appealing to the conscience, you know, the Democrats were appealing to the Republicans saying, what if this were a Democratic president who did this? Right. And the Republicans, you know, are saying, look, this isn't bad enough to get thrown out of office. And both are trying to appeal to the nation. But no, I share your forlornness.
It is a political process. Good. You know what was interesting, Pam, was that at the very beginning, and both chairs of both Judiciary and Intel committees had said at one point, listen, you know, we want this to be a bipartisan buy-in before we do anything. Clearly it's not, and clearly they did something.
Yes.
What happened there?
Well, I mean, I think when you ask whether something is serious enough to be impeachable, we have to remember that the Republicans already put a pole in the ground when they impeached Bill Clinton and said, hey, just lying one time under oath was sufficient enough to be impeached. And they've moved the goalpost now in this particular process, Glenna. When we look at what is going on here, we're not talking about some private personal peccadillo. We weren't impeaching Donald Trump for paying off a porn star to keep quiet in the election, which is on the level of what we're talking about Bill Clinton. Here we're talking about the president using the office of the presidency and the resources of the people of the United States of America to try to get a leg up on a political opponent. And just to make it clear for folks, if it was the other way, if Joe Biden tried to cut a deal with Vladimir Putin, said, hey, I think I'm going to win this. I'm ahead in all the polls. You give me all the dirt on Donald Trump and we'll lift those sanctions. I think Republicans would find that really problematic.
I want to, you're making the arguments that have been made, but I really want to get back to that question. It's clearly not a bipartisan process. So what happened, Marili?
To the contrary, it may be bipartisan the other way. I think there will be Democrats that may vote against the impeachment next week. And what we saw,
there'll be a few, sure.
There might be some. That will be the bipartisanship, not having any Republicans voting for that.
Excuse me, that's fear of losing a swing district.
Which
is legitimate.
Whatever the reason. But what we saw this week was that on Thursday night, they were debating until very late, and they decided to hold it so that they could go back on TV on Friday. Like if they thought anybody really would be watching or caring to see their continued circus that was happening on TV. I don't think the American public
I think the Democrats have a different take on why they went so late. Of course,
the Democrats have a different take, but I just find that minds are not being changed. The American public is tired. I mean, I think they're happy with passing, you know, the U.S. MCA agreement or different things that may be happening in Congress, but not impeachment, because now it's going to move to the Senate, and it's not going to go anywhere. They're not going to have 67 senators vote for impeachment, so this needs to get over quickly. We've seen how the timeline...
But at the same time, it was important that these articles be brought, and for somebody to say, this kind of conduct is not okay. It's not okay
You know-
for a Republican. It's not okay
You
for
know
a
what's not
Democrat
okay,
to
Rosemary?
invite a
The
foreign
results of
nation
the-
to be involved in our election, to use the power of his
What is
office
not no,
to
what-
say you're not,
That
you
is
cannot.
that is your opinion,
No,
but I
it's
think
what
the
they're-
IG,
it's
no.
what our diplomats said.
What about
Our
the IG
diplomats
report? What about the
testified.
IG report this week that found 17 major mistakes with the FISA warrant process? Even today, Sunday, Comey said, "Oh yes, I made a mistake." I'm sorry. 2 years later is a little too
Did
late
you
for
listen to the diplomats who testified?
Oh yes, I did listen to.
And
the
did you
diplomats.
believe them?
You know,
why
Rosemary-
is our intelligence arms and our State Department people, why do Republicans have such a hard time believing so many people who are telling us what they've worked for Republican presidents, Democratic presidents? Why don't you believe
Rosemary,
them?
I do believe them, and that is not. I also believe the IG report, and I also believe that for the first time we had spies in a presidential campaign of Donald Trump, and that is something that we don't talk about enough.
I don't think that that's what the IG report said. And in fact, it stated its conclusion was that the acts of the FBI were appropriate and based on reasonable facts. This whole investigation happened because of what we got from the Australians, not from the Steele report. That was not where it began. And the bottom line is this: if Donald Trump's campaign walked into an investigation of Russian activity, then they get caught up in that trap. The way that Donald Trump could have avoided that is to have reported the approaches from the Russians to the FBI like he was supposed to, like every patriot should have.
All right, we're a little bit in the weeds. Let's get back, if we can, in just the brief time remaining in this segment, to where it goes now, because it's going to go to the Senate Wednesday. The House is going to vote, and they will vote along party lines and pass these 2 articles of impeachment. And Marili, I think you're right. I mean, we know what the Senate's going to do. Mitch McConnell already, has taken sides. He's supposed to be impartial, but he has said, I'm going to follow orders from the White House. I mean, that just sets the tone for what we are going to see, which is more partisan politics.
Politics are partisan, and hopefully we can move forward and get some things done. Because
Well, Congress, as you said earlier, is getting things done with, a budget resolution and with the United States, Canada, Mexico trade agreement. It's kind of amazing, but
it's amazing that they waited for a whole year, and coincidentally, the day that they issue, the impeachment,
got it done.
immediately within an hour they announced that, and there's a reason for that. They were just holding that in their back pocket. They should have done it way sooner.
All right, it's going to be a big week, a lot to watch, and we have a lot more to talk about, so stay tuned. We'll be right back. We are back with our great roundtable, Pam Keith, Rosemary O'Hara, Marili Cancio, let's talk about the election a little bit. Minnesota Senator and candidate for president Amy Klobuchar was in town today, her 4th visit to Florida. Very small group of union people. There she is walking into the SEIU headquarters in Miami the other day.
on Friday, right?
On Friday, and we had an opportunity to talk to her. This woman is bright. She is deep in the weeds on details, on policies. She knows it. I watched her kind of temper herself and not get in the weeds. Rosemary, this is a woman who obviously is capable of being president, politics aside. Does she, in her sort of moderate lane, policy wonky woman, have a shot at the Democratic nomination?
We've all been so focused talking about this impeachment that we're not talking about which we know how it's going to go, that the one thing that we need to keep our eye on that we don't know is what happens in March in the presidential primaries and who the Democrats pick. And what a lot of us who are paying close attention think is that a moderate, not a socialist, is the best choice for America to run against Donald Trump. And in that lane, Amy Klobuchar, Biden, Bloomberg, Buttigieg, the problem is that those of us who pay attention know that she is in that lane, but the great many people are not paying attention, and she hasn't been able to break out to get the kind of name recognition she needs.
And she may
and
not
deserves.
excuse me, and she may not, or none of the Democrats may break out on Thursday night as they're supposed to in their next debate, because there is a union negotiation in LA at Loyola Marymount, and no Democrat is going to cross a picket line.
No.
So that debate may be off.
You know, one of the things that we had talked about on Friday is because a couple of weeks ago we were also at the BB&T Center when the president was here with 22,000 people, and I asked Senator Klobuchar, you know, one-on-one people meet her, they understand what she's about, and really kind of get behind her. I said, can you imagine walking up to the stage in the BB&T and having 20,000 people? And is that a fair question? She said, yeah, absolutely. We do big events. But, you know, the point is, despite policy and intellect, the average voter wants to be excited and passionate and engaged. And you see the president has that. Do you see Democrats getting there?
I don't see it happening, and I'm saying this really objectively. They don't- it's not like Obama. No, seriously. You know, Obama brought that excitement.
He did.
And we don't see any candidate. I mean, perhaps Bernie Sanders. You see much bigger crowds with Senator Sanders go out and speaks, but you don't see that with Biden or Buttigieg, or, you know, I just don't see it. So that lack of excitement, and I agree completely with what Rosemary said, that impeachment has taken its oxygen away from the Democratic race. So we're not talking about who's going to be the nominee for the Democratic Party. Most Democrats don't know who could beat Donald Trump.
It's kind of ancillary, but Pam, let me ask you to weigh in. I mean, nobody here, we don't know, I think, the politics of the UK very well, but in Boris Johnson and the Tories' big win this week, I think there is a message to the Democrats, is there not, about you better pick a more moderate candidate or else, you know, you're going to go down in flames.
Well, I think that is the sort of superficial message. The problem and why it doesn't translate directly is that Labour was also pro-Brexit. If what was going on in the UK was Brexit versus not Brexit, Labour played it badly by also being pro-Brexit. And Jeremy Corbyn was toxic in the UK for a variety of reasons, not the least of which was a very strong strain of anti-Semitism, which doesn't play well anywhere. So I don't know that it translates exactly to our politics, but I do think there's a lesson there. I obviously am a progressive, and I've made no noise about that, but the reality is, who can beat Trump is there are legitimate arguments in two different lanes. The first argument being you got to run somebody who appeals to the middle and gets those swing and maybe Republican leaning voters. And the second attitude is no. When we try to do that, we don't excite our base, we don't turn out the people that we need to, and we are only going to win with surges in the African American, Latino, and young vote, and that we have to pick a candidate that appeals to that vote. Honestly, I think there are different ways of squaring this particular circle, and given that Donald Trump is polling under 40% in many of these swing states, I don't think we should be deciding what we do as Democrats on what pleases Republicans, because God knows that is not how they choose their candidate.
You know, Rosemary, I want to get your take on something that we spotted this week. The West Side Gazette is a very well-read newspaper in Fort Lauderdale's African American community. And this week, the President Trump's campaign put an ad in it, which a lot of people found interesting. What do you think?
I didn't know that. I guess I remember the president saying to the African American community, what have you got to lose? I mean, I guess it's up to the African American community to ask themselves, do they feel like they're better off?
And I think the statistics and the numbers do show that they are better off. And we were seeing how the African American support of the president has increased. He received a much higher number than Romney, and he will receive a higher percentage during his re-election campaign.
It was really interesting to see a glimpse into the strategy of the
Brad
Trump campaign.
Scale is a brilliant.
Sure,
I
strategy,
highly
but-
doubt that.
But
I
Joe
highly
Biden has
doubt
got.
Yeah, I
I mean,
haven't
wait
seen
till
those
Highly
numbers.
doubt
South
that.
Carolina, Joe
I doubt that
Biden is
extremely.
going to just get.
His numbers are going to be better than during his election campaign. The percentage that he received,
Not a
that is the number. I'm not saying that he's going to win the African American vote. I am saying his numbers are going to do better.
Shall we take a little break?
Yeah.
And stay tuned. We'll be back.
Welcome back. We are in the midst of a really great roundtable, and now we kind of want to turn our attention to sea level rise and climate change. And Rosemary, you were in Key West last week for the Southeast Florida Regional Climate Change Compact. You and the editorial pages of the Palm Beach Post, the Miami Herald, are doing this series of really outstanding editorials. But the takeaway, the simple takeaway for me, was that, you know, the scientists who were there said that rather than 14 to 26 inches of sea level rise by 2060, it's going to be 17 to 31 inches by that time.
And that's just the mid-range. You know, everybody agrees the sea is rising, even those who don't believe that climate change is affecting it. But for those who are studying this, it's accelerating, and the pace at which it's accelerating is curving up. Right. And we're seeing things now that we've never seen before. We've seen streets that are flooded for 3 months on end in Key Largo. We're seeing insurance rates that are about to put commercial property underwater in the Keys. We're hearing that to raise a 3-mile stretch of road, it's going to cost $180 million.
I saw that this week, and I thought, what? Can I just show you what 3 feet is like? This is 3 feet. It's not a lot. We talk about sea level rise so often. It's in the news. It's a concept. That conference made really specific policy details and attention. And one of the things you were in the Keys a lot, I know, this idea of managed retreat. I mean, there will be properties in the Keys and elsewhere along the coast that will not exist in a few decades. Marili,
and houses that should not be rebuilt. We see hurricanes.
Talk about that,
you know,
and the emotional impact of thinking about your home, maybe Atlantis at one point.
It's really a reality.
Yeah.
And when people start realizing that maybe they're not going to be able to get their boats under a bridge because the sea level has risen, and that sailboat or that boat is not going to, you know, people are going to feel affected when they start selling real estate. And when you start saying you live in Miami Beach and you start selling your house, and people say, well, I can't afford to buy your house because the flood insurance is ridiculous. And so it's going to have an effect in our economy. And once people feel it in their pocketbooks, that's when you're going to see real change taking place. And we're seeing that conversation about climate change, environment. I think it's going to dominate the mayoral race in Miami, the environmental issues.
It's going to dominate a lot of races. And Pam Keith, you know, I mean, give Ron DeSantis at least this. Rick Scott didn't even want to use the term sea level rise or climate change. And Governor DeSantis has appointed a very competent woman to be the chief resilience officer. I don't know, is that her title?
Yes.
Yeah. And I will give Governor DeSantis credit that he is taking some of these water management and sort of environmental issues more seriously than his predecessor did. I think we just have to accept that there is no localized answer because it's a global problem and it has to be addressed on a global level. We're not going to be able, you know, there are things that we can do maybe locally in terms of urban design or resilience pumping and things like that. There are things that you can do in the short term, but the reality is if this is a money fight, and most political fights are actually money fights, there are people making decisions right now that polluting and carbon emissions, the people making money doing that right now are more important than the people risking their real estate investments down the road. I think, as Marili so eloquently pointed out, that political dynamic could very soon shift.
The Speaker of the Florida House is from Miami, of all places, and we're about to go into the legislative session, and Speaker Oliva won't talk about sea level rise. So most of South Florida gets it. The business community, the local governments, the business community is really involved in this. The governor has put his toe in the water. But let us see an agenda. Let us get something big done this session. So far, I haven't seen him propose anything.
Yeah, well, the legislature meets in January. So, Speaker Oliva, if you're watching, stick your toe in the water and do something about it.
Come in. Thank you so much. Great roundtable. Great to have you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Up next, a Florida grand jury rips into school districts for failing student security and suggests unprecedented consequences. Stay tuned.